Hello, welcome back to Little Quilt House. My name's Amanda Little. Today I'd like to show you the long arm quilting process. When you send a quilt off to the long arm quilter, you'll need to send it in 3 separate pieces: quilt top, your quilt back and your quilt wadding. Lots of long arm quilters usually keep a stock of wadding in. Just check with them before you send your quilt off to them. The quilt I'm going to be working on today is the quilt that I started in my sewing quarter promotional hour. I'll link it down below. If you haven't already watched it, go and have a look and it'll show you how to make the quilt from start to finish. This quilt finishes at 60 inches square, which is an ideal size for a baby playmat. That was the intention when I chose the fabrics. As you'll see, they're all sort of pastel yellows and greens, ideal for a baby boy or a baby girl. As I said on the sewing quarter promotional video, this quilt was made to be a giveaway. If you stick around to the end of the video, I'll give you a bit more information on how you can enter the prize draw and win this quilt for yourself. So it's important when you send your quilt off to be long armed that you send it in separate pieces. Don't baste it together. This is the quilt back. I've just set the wadding and the quilt top to one side for the moment. So I'm going to start by marking the centre of our backing fabric with a pin. I've done that on the top and the bottom. The backing fabric should be at least 8 inches wider and 8 inches longer than your quilt top. So my quilt top is 66 inches. This backing fabric needs to be at least 74 inches square. It is actually a fair bit bigger than that. So with centres marked on the top and bottom, I'm just going to pop the bulk of that backing fabric across the pickup roller. And my first job is to attach the backing fabric to the backing roller. So you'll notice at different points on my machine I've got lots of tape measures. I've also got the centre line marked. What I want to do is just centre that backing fabric and clamp it down. I like to keep everything centred just purely because your leaders will stretch with use, and if I keep it in the centre I get an even stretch rather than a lopsided stretch. So at the moment I'm just using tiny temporary clamps just to get it in position. The system that I've got here, inside my leaders I've sewn a channel and inserted a plastic dowel, and then I'm going to use these smaller and later bigger plastic clamps. This just makes it nice and quick for me because I do a lot of customer quilts. If you're just working on your own quilts at home, pinning is absolutely fine. So you can see I'm using the selvage edge of the backing fabric. I know that that's a good straight line, and I've also got markings on my leaders, so I'm aiming to get the edge of that backing fabric against the marks on my leaders, and that way hopefully everything will stay good and straight as we work. These are the longer clamps. So what I'm going to do now is just clamp the whole length down and remove these smaller ones as I go. Take that pin away. So that's the bottom, the lower part of the backing fabric attached. Now I'm just going to straighten it up as best I can. and start to roll this backing fabric up onto the backing fabric roller. As I work, I'm just going to smooth out. I don't want any pleats or tucks, and if at all possible, I want it to roll onto itself. I don't want it to move to the side or shrink in. I want to keep it perfectly straight. I've rolled the bulk of the backing fabric onto the backing fabric roller. Just can see the top of the backing fabric there. I'm now going to make my way around to the back of the machine and just repeat that process, just clamping on the backing fabric. So it's exactly the same procedure now to attach the top of the quilt backing fabric to the pickup roller. So I've centred my pin, pop a clamp on, just work my way across again, selvage edge level with some sort of mark so that we can try and keep it straight. And then we just replace those small clamps with the longer lengths. I'll just remove that pin. Now you can see our backing fabric's attached and it's nice and even. There's no obvious twists or puckers. So with the backing fabric now attached to the backing roller and the pickup roller, I want to just explain to you the first reason for me needing all that extra fabric. You'll see these clamps can just be a little bit bulky. If they were to be right on that pole, when I bring the machine in and start to quilt, it gets stuck. So for me to have clear, uninterrupted quilting space, I like to just turn the roller slightly to make sure that those clamps are completely out of the way, and that means now I can go wherever I want without it bumping. These two tape measures, as well as being able to keep things straight, they also let me know how much quilting space I've got available. And on this machine it's approximately 12 inches. You can get machines with much bigger throat spaces, but this machine has been absolutely fine for me. I've never needed more than that 12 inches. I'm just now going to pop on the clamps just to check that we're nice and smooth. And now we can bring in our wadding. Here's our wadding fabric. I've opened it out. I like to use wadding from the roll. I do find that it is better quality than wadding in packets. You get an even wadding all the way across. Sometimes in packets it can be a bit patchy. It's a 96-inch wadding that I've got. It comes rolled on the bolt, and that top is folded. Now that outer face is the right face of the wadding. It's punched in the factory, needle punched, and the needle, in the factory the needle has gone down into the fabric and pushed dimples into the right side of the wadding. An easy way to remember is the right side, dimples up, pimples down. When you're layering your quilts, you always want the dimples up. So I've got my wadding, I've roughly concertinaed it. I'm just going to loosen that backing fabric and tuck the wadding down. Again, trying to keep it central. And this wadding is also 4 inches, well 8 inches in total, 8 inches longer and wider than the quilt top itself. There we go, so just roughly placed on and just peaking slightly above. We're not going to be quilting in this area, but we do want our stitches to run off in various places, so more wadding is better than too little. I've marked the centre of the quilt top with a pin. I'm just going to leave that in while we position it on top of the wadding and the backing fabric. Same way as before, just roughly concertina it and tuck it under the quilt top bar. And then we can just position it with the centre of that tape measure. This is actually the quilt top bar, but I don't tend to use it. I like to float my quilts. By that, it means that the only thing that attaches the quilt top, wadding and backing together is the line of basting that I'm going to do in a few minutes. Other than that, all 3 layers are just floating freely. If I were to use this top, I would have attached it with those clamps in the same way as I did the backing fabric and roll it up. But I just feel that I've got more control if I just leave them free. So now what I'm going to do is just pin that into position so we know we've got it on the centre mark, and just tighten the clamp. And now we're just going to straighten up the quilt top. And in a few minutes I'm just going to baste across that top edge, and that's going to sandwich everything together and keep it nice and secure at the top. Before we do that, we need to choose some thread. I've narrowed the thread choice down to 3 colours. White, which will be fine, although all you would see is the embossed effect of the quilting. You wouldn't see your thread once it was quilted. A green, which matches really nicely with the green colours within the quilt. That one would look a little bit stronger as it passed through the white sections of the quilt. The one that I think I'm going to use is the yellow. Again, there's yellow within the quilt, and also the backing fabric is that pale yellow. So I think for this quilt, the yellow is going to be the best choice. I've got the quilt top pinned onto the wadding and the backing fabric, and what I'm going to do now is just baste across that top edge to secure all 3 layers together. Once I've done that, I'll just straighten it up, and then I'm going to baste down each side, and then we're ready to quilt. I've popped my channel lock on, which means I'm going to get a really nice straight horizontal line. If I show you now, it'll just keep going. And I could force it and pull it towards me or push it back, but you can see it's just locked in that position, and that means now that our quilt is going to be good and square to the frame. So I'm just taking probably inch wide basting stitches all across that top edge of the quilt top, making sure to stay within my 1/4 of an inch binding allowance. I like to baste because it's easy to remove. If things should go a little bit skewiffed, I can remove the stitches really quickly and easily. And you'll notice that my thumb is making the stitch, or making the needle, go up and down. That's because on this particular machine I just don't have an automatic baste feature. But again, it's never been a problem for me. Perhaps takes a little bit longer than other machines would, but I don't mind. So I'm just going to continue all the way across top of the quilt. Just remove these pins and just straighten it up as I go. I've basted across the top, and now I've released the clamp, and I'm just going to now make sure before I baste down either side that everything, that all of the layers are nice and level. So I'm just going to throw back the quilt top to expose the wadding, Just make sure that's nice and smooth. Bring the quilt top back down and then just retighten the quilt. So I've popped my vertical channel lock on. This means now that the machine is just going to go back and forth in that same, on that same line, and I can get the sides now basted and ready to quilt. Again, approximately 1 inch apart, and just making sure that the quilt top is in the same position all the way down. I'm going to take the machine across over to the left side now and just repeat that basting down the left hand side. Okay, so our quilt top is now basted. I'll just go across, pick out any loose threads so that they don't get in the way. And now we can choose a design. I'm not sure if you can see that very well, but the pattern that I've picked is one called Cottontails. It's a pantograph or an edge-to-edge design. This means that you get the same pattern repeated from edge to edge, top to bottom on your quilt without any regard for the piecing in the quilt. It's just a continuous pattern all the way over the quilt top. I thought this one was appropriate. The fabric that I've used is Guess How Much I Love You, and you can see there's lots of rabbits on it. I've picked the Cottontails pantograph. I can zoom in and show you that. So it's just a really basic rabbit design. So we're almost ready now to quilt the top. What I need to do now, we've got it pulled taut between the top and the bottom roller. We also need to apply a little bit of tension on either side. As we quilt, the quilt's going to want to draw up, so we just want to hold it in position. With my machine, I've got these crocodile clamps, which are fine, perfectly fine. I think I had 2 to begin with, but what you can see is the pressure, the pull is concentrated on one small area, and it can distort things. If you imagine there would be 2 there. So what I chose to do was make my own side clamps, and a little bit more long-winded than using the crocodile clamps, but I just pop some pins in. Attach it at the side, and I've got a really nice even pull all across that 12 inches of space that I'm going to be quilting on. So our side clamps now are on, we're ready to go. I'm just going to align the pantograph to the quilt, and then we'll set the machine going. So you can see the centre mark there on the pantograph. I'm just going to locate that, locate the top centre of the quilt, tell it where that is, so quilt, and it's going to shoot off and start to quilt. I've set this pantograph up as a 10-foot pattern. Now the quilt is only 60 inches wide, so I just need to reduce that size down, so I'm just going to quickly do that. So I'm just going to tell it where that edge is. Tell it where this edge is, and then let it find its own way. Just secure my stitches to start. I'm going to set the machine off now. It's going to be noisy. We'll probably time lapse this and put a little bit of music to it, but here you go. So it's time now to realign. I'm just going to tie these threads off at the end so that they don't come undone. And I'm going to use a piece of blue masking tape just to give myself a reference mark. Just stick that on. So I'm just dropping the needle into that tape, and that's going to give me a mark. Once I've rolled the quilt forward, I'll be able to find that mark just to realign it. So we'll just trim the threads off, keep it tidy as we go. I'm now just going to release the side clamps, release the clamps on the poles, forward the quilt through another 12 inches, and we'll quilt that next section. Now again, because my machine is really basic, I'm having to wind this by hand. You can get a motorised fabric advance, but they are quite expensive. Actually, what I'm going to do before I do that, I'm just going to baste again down either side, just so that everything's secure, and then I'll just take it back just to meet that last portion that I've just done. So the quilting process is finished now. What I'm going to do is trim away this excess wadding. So this would be folded up and popped in the bag, ready to be returned to the customer. So now I'm just going to remove these side clamps. release the blue clamps on the end. Just push the machine to one side. Unravel this excess backing fabric, remove the leader grip clamps. Just let that drop to the floor. And just do exactly the same at the top of the quilt. So that now is our quilt finished. So here's the finished quilt, all ready now to be trimmed, and what I like to do is just overlock the edges so that when I return it to a customer it's ready to be bound. The light, I think we're struggling now with the light a little bit. I don't know if you can see the quilting texture. Perhaps you'll see it better if I just show you the backing fabric. Okay. So I think you'll agree the pattern really suits the fabric choice. Just these simplistic rabbit images. It would be suitable for a boy or a girl. I don't think it's too feminine at all. Next time I'm going to show you how to bind the quilt the way that I like to bind, slightly different perhaps to other people's methods. So join me next time to see how the quilt is bound. But for now, let me explain to you a little bit more about this giveaway. So to be in with a chance of winning this gorgeous quilt when it's finished, I'd like you to go to my channel, hit the subscribe button, perhaps give this video a thumbs up, hit the notification bell so that you'll never miss another episode. Even if you're already subscribed, don't worry, the first 1,000 subscribers will automatically be entered into the draw. The winner will be pulled out at random and announced once I've hit that magic 1,000 subscribers. All you've got to do is subscribe to my channel. I'll sort out the packaging and the postage. So please go ahead, hit that subscribe button and then join me next time where we'll bind this quilt.